Hello and welcome to another virtual program with the Paul Sawyer Public Library. Tonight we are hosting Candis Tingle from the Kentucky Higher Education Assistance Authority to present Paying for College 101. And she's here to answer all your questions about the Fafsa and how colleges put together packages, financial aid packages, all the questions you might have about paying for college. So I'm going to turn it over to Candis. If you don't have your screen or your Zoom muted, if you don't mind to do that in deference to our speaker. And do you want to do questions at the end, Candis? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. All right. We'll have questions and answer at the end. And with that, I am pleased to turn it over to Candis Tingle. Candis?
Thank you so much, Diane. As mentioned, my name is Candis Tingle, and I am here with Kia tonight to talk about paying for college. And so, as mentioned before, KIA stands for Kentucky Higher Education Assistance Authority. I pretty much like to sum it up this way. KIA is a great hub of information and resources for those who are interested in furthering their education and our professional trainings. And so we have many different services that we offer. One of those includes publications where we print a lot of different book materials, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But all of this is free. We do have one specifically for paying for college. We have a scholarship booklet that I'm going to kind of circle back around to later on, as well as a FAFSA guide and checklist of things that you'll want to have gathered together, the Fsa Id, and just a lot of different materials. The other very, very popular one is called the Getting In, and that has a list of different colleges that are within the state of Kentucky, the cost of their tuition, typically when they require scholarship applications to be submitted. And so it's very, very helpful. And I do encourage, if you aren't familiar with any of these, you'll definitely want to request a copy. It's all free, as mentioned before. And they can be ordered online through the kia.com website, which I will, I have another slide, I'll show you what it looks like. Other things that we help with is completion of the FAFSA, actually registering the KEYS account through the kia.com website. If you're selected for the verification process, which as it relates to the FAFSA and financial aid. And we also offer the KEYS scholarship, the CAP grant. We have a loan that we offer, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about, as well as the 529 savings plan. So we really try to cover different elements as it relates to higher education, resources for how to get started, how to get in, as well as how to pay for it. So going back to the kia.com website, if you were to log in, this would be the first page that you'll see. As you see, there are a bunch of different tablets and different directions you can go. It's so much great information on there, and it's not just limited to those who are students. They're broken down between families, those who are professionals. So when I was a financial aid advisor at a college, I actually used kia.com and got a lot of helpful information from it as well. So it is really designed for each individual, regardless of where you are in terms of your education process and level. But with that said, because there is so much on there, it can sometimes tend to be a bit overwhelming if you're not sure how to get started or what to use, where to go, that type of things. So going back to services that we do offer, presentations, which I'm doing now, but we have different ones available, including just an overview or general one about KIA as a whole and kia.com and resources that we do have available. But some of the common topics that come up, or those who do pull up the website, they're usually looking for the information that you see here, different colleges and career opportunities, information about financial aid and scholarships, not just with Kia, but scholarships that are offered throughout the community. The college admissions process, searching for different scholarships, online distance educations, and so on and so forth. And so the long and short of it, when I'm doing the presentation, typically with the high schoolers, it's kind of hard for them to imagine, you know, why all of this. But in a nutshell, what we've come to understand, why Kia exists, why my job exists, is that when we as Kentuckians are able to maximize our potential through our professional careers, when we are able to be at our best, the whole community benefits from it. There are lots of jobs out there, and we need highly trained, qualified people to fill those services. And so we want to do all that we can to eliminate some of those hurdles that may prevent people from being able to move further into the career of their choice and their options. And so oftentimes that comes with dealing with the education department, but that doesn't have to be just limited to getting college degrees. That could be professional training. And once again, we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to combat those barriers that oftentimes will come up in our lives. So one of the things that we often hear a lot as we talk about wanting to have more earning power is, we'll say, you know, more education. But the other benefits to it as well that we sometimes kind of get dropped off in that conversation, you know, better access to health coverage. Well, that's important, whether it's just you or whether you have a family, whatever your living situation is, having the best health coverage that's affordable and that will meet the needs that you have is extremely important. The other thing that doesn't get talked about too much is when you are in the midst of a job and maybe you're not getting the satisfaction out of it that you would like to, being able to have transferable skills that you could potentially move all of that you learn into a different profession and find success and find fulfillment. Those are things that are of great quality, and it's hard to just replace that. You know, once you have those skills, being able to not only be where you are, but if you are looking to maybe go into different directions, once you have the education and skill trainings to do that, understanding how to communicate that you do have the skills, in fact, you are qualified, sometimes maybe even overqualified for the position that you're applying to. Having education really benefits in that way, being able to talk about those life experiences and the skills that you were able to acquire. So in talking about different school opportunities, I always tell students this, when you are going through the process and deciding what's the best option for you, you should have a couple of things that are already established. Number one, you want to have a good understanding of who you are. And what I mean by that is, what type of environment do you thrive in? Now, there are some schools that they can have classes with well up to 100 or 1,000 students. There are some schools that, you know, their biggest class may be 25 students. You know, there's online, there's so many different options available. And it's always nice to be able to have options and as you are deciding what's best for you, but that can become overwhelming, particularly if you haven't taken the time to examine what your needs are. Which brings me to the other thing, making sure you have a good understanding of what your goals are. And with that, identifying the needs that you have so that you can successfully meet those goals. And lastly, I tell students to make sure you are aware of the resources available that can help you be able to achieve the things that you want to. So as it relates to the higher education process, there's usually two big applications. There's the admission side and there's the financial aid side. And by the way, this wonderful chart here is actually one that we printed in the College Circuit 101 booklet. It is, I believe, page 5 of the booklet. And again, if you would like a copy of it, you can order it off the kia.com website, or you can actually download it through PDF version of it. So if you want to do that while we are going through this film, you're more than welcome to do so. And that way you'll have an electronic copy of it. And you can kind of look at it as we're going through this presentation. But back to what I was saying. So there is the admission side, there's a financial aid side. Now the admission side, it's going to be the filling out the application, letting the schools know that you're interested in participating in whatever programs they're offering. And then, of course, the fun side is a little bit less stressful, give or take. You hear back from the schools whether or not they feel that you'll be a good fit for the programs they're offering. Side of that is the financial aid part of that, which we will spend a great deal of time on. But one of the things I wanted to mention particularly about this chart is it's really helpful with keeping organized and kind of having a checklist of step-by-step what to do and when, so you don't sit and try to do everything in one sitting. I find that many people will like to try to do the admissions part, and they try to do the FAFSA part, and they try to do everything at one time to be done, but it can be quite overwhelming. And oftentimes it leads to bit of burnout or fatigue, but this is a really great way to kind of make sure you are able to get the things done at a decent amount of time without trying to, without overwhelming yourself in that process. So as we talk about financial aid, that includes 4 different types: grants, scholarship, work study, and federal loans. Now, you fill out the FAFSA, as I'll circle back to later on tonight. That is going to look at different grant opportunities that you may be eligible for, work study, and scholarship opportunities are usually those that are going to come from the school or some type of private organization, and may be giving out scholarships for different reasons. So it's good to know is between the scholarships that's available. Grants and scholarships do not have to be paid back, but work study, you don't have to pay back work study, but you do have to work in order to earn and or receive the money. And then loans, we do know that, or we should know that that is one that would need to be paid back. And a very important point that I want to mention about scholarships, because there are some people who may think, well, I don't want to waste time filling out the FAFSA because I already know that I don't want to take out loans, which is totally fine. If you've already set that boundary or standard for yourself and you know that you don't want to have to go that route. But there are a lot of schools nowadays that still require the FAFSA to be completed and submitted for considerations for their scholarships. And some of them have to do with the donors who kind of created that scholarship. They required that the applicant is eligible or has a financial need. And schools have started to use the FAFSA as a way to demonstrate that that individual that they decided to give the scholarship to actually did have the financial need to receive the scholarship. So it is very important, even if you don't think that you'll qualify for anything, that you still complete that FAFSA so that you are not putting yourself in a bad situation with hopes of getting scholarships through the schools and then finding out that the schools won't consider you because you didn't get the FAFSA in, or you missed their FAFSA deadline for scholarship consideration. So that's another very popular thing to note, is that a lot of the schools, even if they have rolling admissions, which means pretty much they will admit you all the way to the end of the school year, it's important that you note that that doesn't mean that scholarships will be considered in the same way that the admissions process is done. And so that's been very heartbreaking to a lot of students, just getting into the school of their dreams, but not being able to afford to go to those schools because they missed out on scholarship deadlines. So. All right, so other sources of financial aid, oftentimes we mentioned about the FAFSA, and we talked about different grant opportunities, which we will get a lot more into, but that is going to be more the federal and state aid. But you're not just limited to that. As mentioned before, there's scholarship opportunities given out from depending on the institution that you're looking at. There are also private scholarships that you can get through the community. And oftentimes those scholarship applications start going out once the new year hits, so during the springtime. And then military, if you are someone who has served, or if your parent has served and may qualify for the GI Bill or some other educational programming, it's very, very important that the schools that you're looking at, that you make sure you go and ask for the school's SCO, or a school certifying official. Their job is to help students, either if they're military themselves or have military dependents, and they're looking to kind of see if they're eligible for educational benefits, and if they're looking to utilize them themselves or transfer those to students. The SCO's job is to help that student with the application process. Now, it's important to note that that individual will not be able to tell the families whether or not they qualify. That's something that the VA will do, but they are certainly there to assist the families and help them navigate the process of being able to complete the application, as well as tap into the access of that if in fact they are eligible to receive educational benefits through the military. And so here are a little more information as we talked about different military benefits. The application itself is going to be available on the gibill.va.gov. So if you're interested in learning more about the different educational benefits as it relates to the military, you'll definitely want to go check that website out. So the other thing I wanted to mention is the private scholarships. We publish a whole booklet filled with information with scholarships that have been reported to us within the community, either through businesses or through different schools. So this is, again, one of the booklets that we print yearly, and it is free. You can request a copy online, or you can just download the PDF off of the kia.com website. We usually send copies of the booklet in the libraries, public libraries. So if you happen to be in one, you can ask to see their booklet. And again, you do have the ability to request your own copy. So. Okay, now to the fun topic of FAFSA. So as mentioned before, a lot of schools are starting to utilize the FAFSA as a way to show a demonstrated financial need. But the long and short of it is the FAFSA application is here to help you by identifying what sources you will be eligible for. It's an application process designed to look internally as well as externally. So internally, meaning it's going to look at you and your family as a whole and assess based on some of the information that it's collecting, what could be used potentially for your education. I always say could, because there are scenarios or situations where families might see their EFC, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but they'll say, we may have some money set to the side, but it may not have, it wasn't our plan to use it for this. We've had other thoughts that we wanted to use the money for. But again, it's here to look at what potential funding you have available that could go towards the education. And it also looks externally, it looks to see, well, are you eligible for the different grant opportunity that's available? Are you eligible for work study? So it is very dependent on the person and the preparation that's been put into getting ready for this. It can be a bit overwhelming if, again, this is something that you try to just kind of sit down and do in one sitting without doing the prep work. But hopefully this presentation will give you all a little bit more confident in terms of what you need, and so that you can sit down and get it done in one sitting, and you don't feel frustrated or overwhelmed with the process itself. But anyway, to access this application, you will either go to fafsa.gov or studentaid.gov. Both of those sites will take you here, which is where you want to be to start the process of the application. And so if you have either never completed one or have not completed a FAFSA, I'd say within the last 5 years, there's been some changes to it, and it would definitely be good to know in terms of navigating it, so you all know exactly what to expect. So once you click on start here, it gives the option of one or two things, to create the FSA ID or to go to the FAFSA form. It is required to have the FSA ID for the student. Now, a parent, if you are filling out the FAFSA for your student, you don't have to have the FSA ID, but for the student, this is something that you will want to have access to. And it is going to ask for a social security number, and or if you don't have a social security number, permanent resident identification number is what you'll want to use. But it is also going to ask to verify a phone number, email. You can do both, but you'll need at least one. And that way, if the student is locked out of the application, if they completely forget their password, this makes it much easier in terms of them being able to identify that you are who you say you are, and they can just send you a code to reset and move forward from there. So you will log in, press request, create the FSA ID. With that, you'll need to know your full name, date of birth, social, and you'll want to put the email address or phone number within that. Another really cool feature that has come out recently, fairly recently, is the My Student Aid mobile app. And this allows you to complete the FAFSA right on your phone. And for some of you, if you're like myself, when I heard of it, I wasn't too excited about that opportunity. It's like, okay, something else to do on the phone. But as I've gone to different schools, I've realized it has actually been much easier to complete the FAFSA on a phone than for, say, like a Chromebook. So there were just times where whether the internet wasn't working or created some barriers, and it made it difficult to complete the FAFSA on the Chromebook. We're able to pull out the cell phone, pull up the Student Aid mobile app, and have it submitted within 15, 20 minutes. And so there are times if you are in it and you find yourself, if it's stalling on you and you've tried to refresh or you've logged out, tried to log back in, it doesn't work, it might be worth trying the mobile app. So in terms of filling out the application, there are a variety of ways to do so. As mentioned before, there is the option to do it on the mobile app. You can do it electronically through the fafsa.com. You are still able to download and mail in a paper FAFSA. I don't recommend that. It takes a really long time to process. And once it's processed, then it has to be sent to the schools, which could further delay time. And just getting it from the mail to where it actually needs to go, that can be somewhere from 7 to 10 business days. So you have that, and then it actually has to be processed and accepted and then sent out to the schools. So we can be looking well into a month, if not longer, with doing the paper application. But sometimes, you know, stuff happens, and if that's the only way you feel that you can get it done, hopefully not. But if it is, that is still an option available to you all. So these are the things that you will want to have with you as you are completing that FAFSA application. Number one, you'll want to make sure you have your social security number and or alien registration number. Taxes. So if you are, for instance, planning to attend school in the fall, you'll want to make sure you are doing the FAFSA application for the year 2022, 2023. And with that, you'll need taxes for the year 2020. So it's very important that you make sure as you're going through and filling out that you use the taxes that it needs for that particular year. And for each FAFSA, they use what's called the prior year. And I'll get a little bit more into the reasoning behind using that. So you'll want to have your tax information. You'll also want to have your W-2s. So if you are someone who has earned income or you had earned income in the year 2020, you'll want to make sure you have a copy of your W-2s sitting to the side and ready to go. And the other things you may want to have on hand is your account balances as it relates to your cash savings and or checkings information. And if you have any investments, you'll want to have documentation about that. So there'll be questions on the FAFSA that will ask for those things. Okay, so as mentioned before, I threw out the term EFC. So in a nutshell, as we talked about the assessment of the FAFSA, looking internally as well as externally to see what aid the applicant is going to be eligible for. The biggest impact to that is going to be EFC. And it is kind of complex in terms of the formula overall. Oftentimes people tend to get it confused. You know, some people say, well, I have a friend that I work with, we make the same amount of money, we have the same amount of children, and somehow they seem to have a lesser amount EFC than I do. And I just don't understand that. So when it comes to the EFC, it's so important to note that there are a lot of deciding things that go into that are available and reported. If there are any 529s or if there are any type of trust funds, all of those things are considered assets and they are going to have some impact to what the overall EFC turns out to be. Things that are not taken into consideration when it comes to EFC is debt. If there are prior student loans, that's not going to be taken into consideration for EFC purposes. If you are underwater on a car or a home, for the FAFSA EFC purposes, those things are not going to be taken into consideration. All right. So once we've got the FAFSA done and completed, we send it off and we immediately should get something back, especially if we registered an email, typically get something back within 48 hours saying, congratulations, we've received your FAFSA, and it should show what the EFC is. That information is then sent off to the schools, and the schools will create a financial aid award offer letter based on the information they receive. Now, at that time or at this time, you will also get a copy of what the EFC was determined to be in the form of a student aid report. And this gives you the opportunity to kind of look over and see what the assessment is in terms of that EFC. And I'll go into a little bit more on if there needs to be any updates or corrections and or professional judgments done. So as I mentioned before, EFC stands for Expected Family Contribution, and that's going to be the result that was calculated based on all of the information gathered in the FAFSA and the formula that they created to come up with, and the initial number sent off to the schools for your financial aid package to be done. And so before I go any further into the cost of attendance, I do want to just say this, because there have been so many changes, particularly within the last couple years or so, the financial situation for each family has changed. And so, as I mentioned, when using the income taxes, the FAFSA always uses the prior year. And reason being is because if there is some type of change that occur, then that gives families the opportunity to say, hey, there's been some changes, and that income that you saw in 2020 may not be reflective of what my income situation is now. And so once that, if you see that, you see your EFC and you don't feel that it's a good indicator of kind of where you are financially or your family is, or maybe there are some changes that may have occurred if you've gotten married or divorced, if you've had to leave your job for whatever reason, or you took another job and maybe the pay is different. All of those things are what we would call a special circumstance, where you can bring that information up to the financial aid office, whatever school that you're looking at, and let them know that there have been some changes to your lifestyle and you would like a reevaluation of the EFC. And so typically what the schools will do is ask for a copy of your most recent tax returns. So if you've done 2021 and you've gotten those back and they've been confirmed, they may ask for a copy of that, and they may be able to use the information from that income tax to send and say, hey, this person has a legitimate change within the home, and we want to honor that. We want to bypass the 2020 year and just look at the 2021 year. Other things they may ask for, if there was, for instance, some type of layoff or unemployment, they may ask for information regarding unemployment that may have been received, or some type of letter showing the separation of the job. So depending on the financial aid office, it's important to note that if you are considering asking for a special circumstance appeal, each school may do a little bit differently, and they may ask for something a little differently. And so their outcome, it's not guaranteed. If you are, for instance, applying to 2 schools and you ask them to reevaluate your financial aid because of a special circumstance or a life-changing situation, it's important to note that that does not automatically mean that they'll both be able to accept and or honor those changes and just bypass the 2020. So very important that you be able to have a conversation with the financial aid office and make sure you have a good understanding of what it is that they need so that they can do a proper assessment of the changes that you reported. All right, so moving on, I want to talk a little bit more about the cost of attendance, because this is how the financial aid award or offer letter is made up. So we have the EFC, which we talked about, which comes from the FAFSA after it has been completed. Then we have cost of attendance. And I always like to draw attention to this because this oftentimes it's not discussed in depth in the way that it should be, to kind of help people as they're navigating what's best for them. It's helpful to understand how this all comes together. And so there's a difference between the direct cost and indirect costs, but it's really both of these things that it's going to make up the cost of attendance. Direct costs are those things that are not going to change regardless of, whatever the situation is. Tuition and fees, whether you're a full-time student or part-time student, that's generally going to be the same for students who are within that same, the charges are going to be the same for mostly all of the students. If you are on room and board, if you're living on campus and you purchase a meal plan, those things are generally going to be the same per student. Those rates don't change a whole lot. They may have different options in terms of the room and the meal plans, but essentially everyone's going to see the same charge. But these indirect costs, for some people, can be make or break, because these are things that are not, you're not going to get an exact cost, because it's going to, depending on that individual person, these things may fluctuate. So for instance, transportation, well, that's going to be dependent on where you are versus where someone else lives. And if you're a commuter versus if you're someone who lives on campus. Books and supplies is something else that's going to be mainly based on the class courses that you take, and if they require additional supplies. So that those things are kind of hard to give an exact number. You won't know that until you actually get a bill from the school. But the other really good one that I like to mention is the miscellaneous, which could mean a ton of things, but oftentimes this can mean health coverage. Some schools will provide that for students, and they'll automatically put that on their bill. But if you're someone who has health insurance, if you're covered through your job, for instance, then you may not need the school's health insurance. And so it's important to make sure you have a good understanding. If you do happen to see miscellaneous, you'll want to know, just kind of follow up with them to see what miscellaneous is, so that you are not paying for services that you don't need and are not planning to utilize. So, but it could also mean things like lab fees or campus activities. But it's just good to know overall what it is that you're responsible for as it relates to the payment options. But as mentioned before, the direct costs and the indirect costs, all of these things are what's going to make up your overall cost of attendance, or your cost to go to the school that you decide. And so between the two, the cost of attendance subtracted by the EFC is going to give the financial aid office what your particular financial need will be. And then based off of that, the financial aid award letter is presented and sent out to you. And so again, that's why it's really important. If you get your EFC back and you don't feel it is representative of your current financial situation, make sure you advocate for yourself by letting them know that there have been some changes, and you want to know if you can, if you can have your most recent income be taken into consideration. So another thing I do want to note, which can affect the financial aid offer letter, is the verification process. Now, for those who are selected for verification, they're going to be notified from the financial aid office. And if that particular school works with KIA, you may get a notification from KIA in regards to verification. This does not mean you did anything wrong or that you completed the FAFSA wrong. It's really just a way for the federal government to tap us and say, hey, just follow up with the student and make sure all of the information that is put in was intended to do so. And so it is very important that if you are selected for verification, you do want to follow up and submit the documents that's being requested, because this is going to have a direct impact on your financial aid offer letter at the very end, whatever you're getting back. And so The other thing I want to mention about verification, I used to do verification at a college, and there were times when I would finish the verification process and it turned out there were some things that needed to be updated because they weren't quite accurate. However, it allowed that student to receive more money than what they originally were, what they had saw when they first completed the FAFSA. So it turned out to be a really big benefit for that student once verification was all said and done. But the end of the short of it, if you don't complete the verification process, then you won't be able to get the financial aid award letter showing exactly how much you're going to receive, which is going to impact your ability to know in terms of affordability whether the school is going to be a good option for you. And if you do happen to find out you were selected for verification and would like some assistance with this process, again, it is one of the services offered through KIA, so you can reach out to myself and I can either answer any questions you may have about that process or try to help you navigate that. Right, and so as we talked about the different types of aid, I wanted to give you a more of a visual. And again, this is printed from one of the booklets that we have, the college circuit, on page 18. It shows the different types of aid that's available through the federal government. So when you complete the FAFSA, this is essentially the different type of aid that they are looking to see if you're a match for. So we've got the Pell Grant, SEOG Grant, Teach Grant, Work Study, and as we talked about before, the different loan options. Now, that's for the federal. At the state level, as Kentucky residents who are attending Kentucky school, it's also going to look through and see if you're eligible for any of the scholarships or grants through the state. So that would include the KEYS money for those who are interested in a work-ready Kentucky scholarship, the CAP grant, and the KTG, which is going to be for those who are attending the private school. Now, all of these have different criteria that you will need to meet in order to see if you would be eligible for them. So you don't have to just fill out the FAFSA and kind of wait to see whether or not you would qualify. This is also part of that same College Circuit 101 book. But any of these scholarships or grants you can look up individually, either through the kia.com website, or if you want, you can request a copy of that College Circuit 101, and it has this information in here. It also has what you will need to look at to see if you're eligible for those. You can kind of read through it here on the screen, but because I'm getting ready to flip to the next slide, I just wanted to point that out there that all of this information is located in one of the booklets. All right, so wanted to spend some more time talking a little bit more about the different loan options that's available. Now, when you complete the FAFSA, they are looking to see your eligibility for the subsidized and unsubsidized loan. And then the plus loan is something that would have to be filled out and a credit check would be done for it, which is a little different than what the subsidized and unsubsidized loan options are. One of the things I like to mention as it relates to the loan is to know that because you're being offered it does not mean you have to accept it. And even if you decide that you do want to go ahead and take out a loan, you don't have to you don't have to accept the full amount that's being offered to you. So that is a really good point to note, which I will come back to in just a few minutes with some other slides. And so as we talked about, again, with the different federal direct loans, we have the difference between the subsidized and the unsubsidized versus the plus loans. Now, one of the things that you will see that jumps out, we talked about the credit check. There's a credit check for PLUS loans, but there's not one for the subsidized and unsubsidized loan. The interest rate is much different, as you can see with the PLUS loan. But the other thing I do want to mention as we talk about subsidized loan versus unsubsidized loan. Subsidized loan is a loan that the interest is paid on the behalf of the borrower while they're in school. Now, the unsubsidized loan, that interest will start to occur and take effect as soon as the funds hit the student's account. So it's good to know the difference between the two. And oftentimes what will happen is because subsidized is usually offered, there's usually more offered in a subsidized loan than there is an unsubsidized loan. Those who are trying to make a good decision by making sure they take the minimum amount needed, they may see the unsubsidized loan only being $2,000, and so they will choose that instead of the subsidized loan, which may be $3,500. But in reality, it would be much better in the best interest of the student to choose the subsidized loan, because again, the interest is paid for the student while they're in school, but the unsubsidized, the interest starts to occur as soon as it hits the account. All right, so we were talking about the difference with the subsidized and the unsubsidized. This here is an overview of how much the student can borrow each year they're in school, and the difference between the dependent student and independent student versus a graduate student. So as a incoming freshman, undergraduate, the maximum amount of loans that could be borrowed for a dependent student is going to be $5,500. However, for an independent student who is in first year in undergraduate program, that you notice there's a much bigger difference. It's going to be that $9,500. And so you'll also notice as the student progresses from their second year to their third year, the amount that the student is able to borrow goes up. So that's good to know. All right, so here are some options in terms of different federal loan repayment plans. And it's good to just note that you don't have to wait until you finish your schooling to start a payment plan. If you can afford to start paying on the loan sooner than later, it would not be a bad idea to do so. I work with quite a few students who started making their loan payments around their junior year. And it wasn't a whole lot, but it was something. And so by the time they graduated, they pretty much had the loans that they borrowed paid down. And of course, each situation is different. A lot of things were taken into consideration. They weren't borrowing the maximum amount of loans. They didn't need to with the schooling that they had chosen to attend. But either way, it just, for them, they'd already gotten into that habit of being able to pay back something that put things towards the loan as they borrowed it. So they didn't have this astronomical amount of debt just sitting waiting for them when they finish school, and they really helped themselves out by doing so. And so this is just an example, kind of just a sample of ways you can start making payment plans if you know that you are someone that will need to borrow loans in order for you to continue your education. Okay, so I did want to give more of a visual of the award letter and how all of that comes together and comes to play. And so just going to start with a little case study. As you see this lovely family here, and we're going to call the student, which is going to be in this, the mom, we're going to call her Hannah. Hannah is 35 years old, and she is making around $50,000 a year. So her AGI has come back. Or we'll go a little bit more into that in just a second. So she is a single parent. She has one child. She is going back to school. So there's 2 people in the home, and there's 1 person going to school, and that's going to be Hannah. And so based upon her $50,000 a year job, she did the FAFSA, and her FAFSA came out, her EFC came out to around $2,914. And so this is a little visual exactly how that would work between the different schools. Now, that first layer, which shows the EFC, which means that is what is expected for Hannah to pay, that $2,914. But then Hannah qualified for the federal Pell Grant. So we've got the Pell Grant put in there. And all of this, of course, is going towards the cost to attend the particular schooling. And so you see KCTCS versus a 4-year public versus a 4-year private school. All right, so Hannah has the federal Pell Grant, but then she also qualified for the CAP grant, because as a Kentucky resident, if you qualify for the federal Pell Grant, then you'll be considered for the CAP grant, which is a state grant. Now, with the 4-year private institution, she was able to receive an additional scholarship or for the KTG grant, which you'll notice is not on the 4-year public school or KCTCS because it's only given out through the private school. But then we have different grant loans work scholarships that was given to Hannah from that school. So we've got about $10,000 from the private school, $5,500 from the public school. And then here KCTCS gave Hannah $3,000. So from there, you'll notice it says the little tan area is going to represent the federal direct loan. And that for KCTCS was able to pay off the bill with all of those different aid options. 4-year public, there were that was pretty much able to meet the cost of attendance there. And then we have the 4-year private school. It's mostly paid off, but there's still a little bit left at the top that we may still need to fill in. And so that could be filled in through a number of ways, either through work study or different private scholarship opportunity that Hannah might have been able to obtain to go towards her education. This is just a little visual to kind of show you how each aid is applied to help the student be able to afford the school. And then this is a sample award letter, which is probably more common of what you'll see if once you start applying to different schools and once they receive your FAFSA, they will send out an award letter to you. And typically the grants and any scholarships the school is offering, those they oftentimes will accept on behalf of the student. But anything related to the loans, as you see here, there's a subsidized loan and an unsubsidized loan. If those are things that you decide that you want to use in order to afford your education, you'll need to log on to their system and accept those loans. And they may have additional steps that you'll need to do as well in order to be able to receive them. But overall, this is typically what an award letter will look like. They'll have it broken down in between the different grants that was available and the scholarship opportunities and the loans. And again, as mentioned before, just because the loans are offered does not mean that you have to accept them or that you have to accept them in their full amount or full capacity. If you are someone who is able to save or want to do a work with the school and do a payment plan. A lot of schools are very flexible in that. And, you know, you sit down and you talk with them and kind of work out, you know, maybe you can pay, I don't know, $200-300 per paycheck that you receive, and you want that to go towards the balance. A lot of schools are more than happy to work with the individuals so that they can make you feel comfortable with whatever the arrangements are. And again, just because it's there, you don't have to accept that. The other thing that you can do, if you do decide, hey, I do need a loan, or I would like to take out a loan, maybe instead of taking out $1,750, maybe you can get by with taking a loan for $800. And as we talked about, do a combination of that in the different payment plans. And so the other thing I do want to mention, as you can see on the screen, or at least bring to your attention, you'll notice that it shows the total for the loans being $3,500 for the subsidized loan, and then $6,000 for the unsubsidized loan. That is going to be broken down between fall and spring. So if you decide you're going to attend school in the fall, but you're not going to go in the spring, then you're only going to get half that amount. So instead of getting the full $3,500, you will see the $1,750. And even if you decide that you're going to go for both fall and spring, it's still going to be split in half. So you won't get that full amount, just you won't get that $3,500 for one semester. It's going to be at least 2. How are we doing on time?
We're about out of time.
Okay. Well, I am going to zip through these really quickly. If you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and unmute and chime in and ask them. But lastly, I just wanted to leave you with some more different ways you can search for scholarships. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Candice. And can you be sure to leave your email address in the chat in case
Absolutely.
to get in touch with you directly?
Sure, I can totally do that.
And if you do have a question, feel free to unmute and go ahead and ask that now if you'd like.
Thank you so much, ladies. Thank you. My question is, do you know any app that can help get some scholarship or grant? I heard like there's an app called like Scully. Yes, it's pretty good. Would you elaborate on that for me, please?
I'm not familiar with Scully, but there are different websites where scholarship searches they're used to find different scholarship opportunities. And so let me make sure I hit on that. So fastweb.com is one that we commonly recommend those who are looking for scholarships to utilize. And the other thing we do recommend is just being careful with where you go and what you sign up to, because some of the sites, if they're not vetted correctly, they could be harmful with trying to steal your information.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you again so much for having me. I appreciate your time. And if you think of any other questions, I do have my email in the chat, so feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you so much, Candice. We appreciate all that you do and all that you all do at KIA. You're a wonderful resource for the Commonwealth. We appreciate you so very much. We do have those publications that Candice was talking about at the library. And I know sometimes you all bring by like multiple boxes of multiples. So we'll try to make sure that we have some copies that folks can pick up if they're interested. So All right, but thank you so much, and thank you to our participant. I hope that you got a lot of answers tonight. And again, Candis's email address is in the chat if you'd like to contact her directly. But with that, I wish everyone a good evening, and I hope that you'll join us for another program with the Paul Sawyer Public Library very soon. Have a great night.
You too. Thank you. Bye.